it's quiet enough. Welcome, welcome. How are you guys? It's good to see you. Happy Father's Day. We might have to stand up and stretch a little bit. It's the way it is. Welcome to Austin New Church. Let's sing a little bit here.
You are
gonna let me down. You're never 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 gonna let me down.
Y'all are good. I'm telling y'all that. Nice fiddle work, Christabel. Appreciate that. That was good. Is it a fiddle? No, it's a violin. Okay, y'all can be seated. Welcome to Austin New Church, everybody. Jason, is there anything that guy can't do? Right? He can't play that. I just found out this morning Jason toured with the Jonas Brothers. Is this true or not? No, seriously. You toured with the Jonas Brothers. But the Jonas Brothers were there. And they were infants or something, right? Okay. They were being potty trained at the time. Anyway, welcome to Austin New Church, y'all. I'm Trey. I'm one of the pastors here. Thank you for coming. If you're new with us, if you're visiting, or maybe it's been the first few weeks, we have this QR code that you could go to, navigate to our website, and you can fill out this virtual information card, get you on the mailing list, start a conversation with us. Let us know how you found out about us, you know, what you think of this, and anyway, it'd be nice to hear from you. Happy Juneteenth, everyone. We do, as a church that celebrates freedom, we believe that the gospel does set free, and we're just thankful that our black brothers and sisters are able to celebrate, and we want to lift them up in support and prayer and encouragement any way we can, and so just happy Juneteenth. Just know that. Also, happy Father's Day. Any dads in the house? Any dad? What do y'all want to do for Father's Day? Take a nap, watch golf. Is that kind of... No, nothing? Nobody? Okay, nobody's with me. I just want to be left alone. That's really what I want to do is for Father's Day. Leave me alone. Anyway, we do have Sam, our very own Sam Beach, what's formerly known as our very own. Samantha Beach is leaving us, actually, and we're sending her off this Thursday at Central Machine Works at 7 p.m., if you know Sam, you want to give her one last hug before she takes off. She goes for the whole month of July to this theater camp that her and her husband will lead. So they're going to be gone. And then she'll be back in October. I think we've scheduled her to come back October 2nd to teach again with us, and hopefully we'll get some more dates from her in the future. But she's taking off to North Carolina with her family in another role in another church. And so we just want to bless her, wish her well, give her a hug, and say, see you in October kind of thing. So come out if you know Sam. If you don't know Sam, come out anyway, because there are a bunch of us will be there. And we can just hang out and have a beverage or something at Central Machine Works, 7 p.m. Thursday. And then also, last thing is we're supporting Miss Lupe in her women's conference that she's got coming up, the 6th annual women's conference. Miss Lupe leads the group over at Santa Rita, which is a low-income housing development on the east side of Austin. And she's done this for 6 years now, where she just has all these women, hundred of women, how about that? Where she brings in and just encourages and gives them ideas and chances of connection and stuff like that in their community. And the way we're supporting them as a church is we're providing $25 gift cards, HEB gift cards, to each woman for their little goodie bag that they have. And so we're asking you to help participate. We're over halfway there now, but $25 gets a gift card. $100 will get 4 gift cards. But just let us, help us there. Go to this site. It's a PayPal account. through the church, and then we're going to be giving her gift cards before this July 1st conference. And I think that's about it. If you want to, if you would, and you're able, stand and greet somebody around you and talk about the Jonas Brothers and Jason's participation with them. Anyway, oh, goodness. Hey, everybody, welcome to those guys online. Good to be with you. Good for you to be with us. Thank you. Dana has sent out a thing earlier in the week in the Out-of-Towners group that has talks about that weekend in November, the November 4th through 6th, I believe. Different things that if you're interested in, you can check the box, and we can make sure to have those meetings, have those, round table discussions, stuff like that. So be sure to go to that in the Out-of-Towners, whatever you call it, Out-of-Towners Facebook group. A lot going on here. It's summer. It's freaking hot. Hope it's cool where you are. And I guess you saw the news that we're in the process of getting a new home, new building. That's not going to be online until 2025, but I envision enhanced opportunities like this, enhanced visual, video type stuff, and so we're excited about that. Anyway, love you guys. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for always tuning in and your prayers and your support. We love you guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. For those of you who were watching Trey speak without the mic on the whole time, he knew the mic was off. Actually, he was talking to the online audience. Hello, ANC Out-of-Towners. Some of you are like, what is he doing? Does he know the mic is off? Yeah, he knows the mic is off. He's sharp as a marble, this Trey. He's got an edge on him like a spoon, man. Some of you are that's just gonna land right in the middle of the sermon. In the most awkward time, you're gonna be like, oh, that's so funny. No, dad jokes, it's Dad's Day. What can I say? Happy Father's Day to you. If you are conventionally defined as a parent, as a father, or if you father things into new life in any way that definition allows for that understanding, I wish you Happy Father's Day. There are men in the room who want to be dads and for whatever reason have not been able to. There are men in the room who don't want to be dads and still are. Isn't that ironic? Some of you struggling with the weight of that. But here's how I define fatherhood, and we've talked about this in the past on Father's Day. We're not going to do a Father's Day sermon. It seems a little self-congratulating to do that on a day like today. But a father is anyone who waters with tears good things that can come to life. And so I mean that. And that means there are as many female fathers in the room as there are men. Some of us have not watered good things with tears. We were taught that wasn't good fathering. So happy Father's Day to you. It's a day that I love increasingly. It's the most important hat that I wear. I don't know if it's one of your many hats. Chances are it's one of several hats that you wear. Sometimes I wear it with grace and sometimes I don't. I think there's a trail behind all of us dads where we wish we could do things different and show up differently than we did. But kids are forgiving. It's amazing. My children have sat through this sermon twice today. So happy Father's Day to me. My 5 daughters who are now scattered all around the world, actually just Chicago and Central Texas, soon to be also Europe and Spain. They're the whole world to me, so I love this day. So we're going to try something ambitious over the next few weeks. The summer gives us a breather from the lectionary. Once we get past Pentecost and all the things to do with, Advent, then Epiphany, then Lent, then Easter, then Pentecost, and all of those things. Once we get into this time of the year, we call that sort of mean time or green time, whatever you want to call it. But it's a chance to take a break from the lectionary and just sort of follow our muse, as it were. And whatever that next hard conversation is, that's what I want to be having during the summer. And it's not because people are away and they won't hear what we're talking about. It's just how we kind of roll around here. And so if it feels like a hard conversation, I'm going to go for it because that's what grown-ups do. Grown-ups have hard conversations, right? Not everyone in your life that is supposed to be a grown-up actually acts like a grown-up, but I'm just saying, just concede the point. Grown-ups have hard conversations when they need to. So for a while now, we've been talking about going back and re-looking at old things through the lens of new experiences in search of new meaning. It's just drifted. It's become this sort of the subtext of the spring for us. And I'm not talking about looking back with anger or with new axes to grind or old axes to grind. That was a season of my life. I'm sorry you lived through it. You did. We came through it. That was a season of my life for certain. But now I'm reaching back these days for different reasons. And I don't know if you can hear it, but I hope you can. Increasingly for me, reaching back is about gratitude and curiosity, genuinely. We're growing up together, you and I, as it turns out, if you've been around for a minute. And many of us now feel appreciation and admiration when we look back at the forces, sometimes even the traumas that shaped us. And it feels right, doesn't it, to look back with an open heart, which is, I suspect, the long-awaited new little bud, the new little shoot of what we would call faith reorientation. You know, it's a cycle. First, it's disorienting, and then it takes shape again. So it goes from disorientation to reorientation. You could think of it as faith reintegration or faith reconstruction or the rediscovery of the beauty buried in our stories. I think we're beginning to see a new little bud come up through the soil. We aren't made of loss and trauma alone. We aren't. The church wounds and the church heals, and I don't know how to explain that to you, but sometimes the same site initiates the same any one of those two processes. And starting from anywhere with a whole heart, an open heart, I think we can always find the light. I hope you believe that because I know that I do. Well, now, for sure, we have a long way to go. I'm not saying we've arrived anywhere, but things are beginning to take shape, at least for me. Together we look back and we make fresh meaning of things because we can, because our faith empowers us to constantly be in that mode of looking back and making new meaning. This is actually what following Jesus means. This is actually what discipleship looks like. Isn't that what grown-ups do, after all? And with each new cycle or layer or season, however you want to refer to it, of disorientation and reorientation, what I'm discovering as the residue in my heart is that courage is beginning to build for me. I'm starting to see some courage take shape after all these years. And so now, finally, I think I'm ready to look again with fresh eyes and an open heart at those seminal stories from the Old Testament that shaped our imagination as children. You know the ones: creation in the Garden of Eden, Noah's Ark, Tower of Babel, Abraham and Isaac, Sodom and Gomorrah, Moses and the Red Sea, David and Goliath, Samson and Delilah, Jonah and the large fish. I don't think we can technically call it a whale, but you know the story, right? These are the oldest stories in Christianity. Well, honestly, if we're being honest, they aren't even our stories. We stole them. These come from Judaism, which means we may need some help from them to interpret these stories. I wonder if we could just begin to be a little more honest about that. These ancient stories, they come from somewhere. We are very willing to appropriate all things that we need, right? This being America, as we do. They belonged to someone before they belonged to us, but we've been telling them to ourselves for so long that we've all but forgotten their origin. These were the first stories told to us as children, and so they carried a lot of weight. Even if some of them are old and weird and, let's be honest, unbelievable and impossible to imagine, we mostly ignore them as grown-ups as we learn and develop because we don't know how to make sense of these simple ancient stories that we were told. But I think there's a better option than just throwing them away, which many of my colleagues have decided to do, and I don't hate them for that. There's a better option. Can't we just name what's awkward? Can't we just admit when these stories don't make sense? Can't we be honest about that? I mean, doesn't that seem like the grown-up option? Now, these aren't the only stories that we were told. They were important enough to turn up on flannel graph boards in Sunday school rooms where teachers made sure that we were crystal clear about the essential details that any tiny Christian soldier might need right before they sent us off to apologetics camps as teens. You know the ones. It's a lot of autobiography in that paragraph. And to be clear, these are larger than life stories. These stories did a decent job of opening our hearts and our minds. I value them, I really do, but we aren't 8 anymore. Our faith has matured, and it's not just us that have grown. I think society itself has matured, collectively as well. 8-year-olds, you see, can swallow stories of enormous fish swallowing reluctant missionaries, but do grown-ups have to in all of their supposed factual detail? Well, as Ilia Delio points out in a dozen masterful written works that she's left, not only do organisms evolve, but so do organizations of organisms. So consciousness rises. Organisms adapt, they morph and remap and redesign and shift and grow and re-aim and change. But so do systems of organisms. So does consciousness together. What I'm suggesting to us is that it's time to rethink some of the things we were told, not to think critically about. If we don't, our kids they're just not going to have it. So that's what I'm suggesting we do. I think we're all growing up, as it were. The cosmos is coming of age. She's aware of herself in new ways that wasn't true before, at least it seems that way to me. And many of our original stories made perfect sense to us as children, but being childlike is not the same as being childish. Childishness is something we need to let go of. Childlikeness, well, that's worth hanging on to. You see, childlikeness is curious. It's curiosity. Childishness is closed-minded and full of fear. Don't ask questions of my stories, right? Childlikeness is full of wonder and pursuit. Childishness is worried about asking the wrong questions, like we might be signing up for some sort of a celestial slap in the face if we dare ask the wrong question. Well, on the other hand, adults are generally better at distinguishing between fables and facts. Maybe not always, but for the most part. And even if we struggle with this from time to time, at least as adults, we know not to feel dirty or defiant for wondering out loud. Adults know that stories carry so much more meaning than just facts attached to them. In fact, from a sociological or social science perspective, myths and stories and tribal lore are best understood as functional things, not factual things. And I wonder if I might set up this whole story, this whole series, with the following missionary story. It's my favorite one. It's one of my favorites. So Togo Amulamu was the chief and the founding member of the Tabaru tribe living in the Spice Islands in eastern Indonesia. Now, you might know them as the Moluccan Islands if you look on your map, but it's the same group of islands. It's the part of the world where nutmeg and mace grow native, where they come from. So you could find Borneo and look north-northwest for an island called Halmahera. It's kind of small, but it's next to a larger one called Ternate. That's the part of the world that I'm talking about. Well, my friend spent his entire career there as a missionary linguist, translating the New Testament into the Tabaru language. They had no written code until him. They had an oral language, but it only existed in the hearing and the telling of it. And his gift to them, in addition to the New Testament, which was a huge gift, after 30 years of his life living there, was to give them a well-written and well-researched history of the origin of their tribe. The New Testament, of course, was a huge gift, but so was their personal story written down. Both mattered immensely. Here's why. The founding chief was said to have been brave, of course, and enormous. So tall, in fact, that the colonnades of the portico of his house, which now lay in ruin, according to centuries of oral tradition, were bigger than anything the Tabaru had ever seen made by human hands. Enormous stone colonnades. Also, there was a legendary spot near the ruins of that original home where in local river rock, Togo Amulamu's foot was said to have been permanently imprinted in the stone. Now, when a tribe has only shared their stories via oral tradition, when they take their leap into written history of the same telling of their beginnings, for something to be trustworthy and true, the tribal leaders would have to see it with their own eyes, and then it could be written down. So I was honored to be part of an expedition that went deep into the rainforest and laid eyes on these two sites, the footprint in the river rock and these massive colonnades that supposedly held up the front portico of the home of their founding chief. So deep into the jungle we went, first on motorcycles, and I was so delighted, and then for hours on foot, and that was somewhat less delightful. A whole entourage of us, and we found exactly what we were told we might find, something that looked like a footprint in stone, sort of, and huge pillars, several of them laying on one another, as if something had toppled an ancient palace, sort of. Now, you know me, I got an A in geology in college. I got an A in all my college classes, if you must know. I can flex on Father's Day. We talked about something called columnar basalt. Does anyone know what that is? Columnar basalt. Oh, I love it. A whole room full of people who don't know what I'm talking about. I knew that it wasn't uncommon in that part of Indonesia, something called columnar basalt. In the Indonesian archipelago, you see, there was a lot of volcanic activity. And when basalt, which is a grainy sort of form of Earth's lava, when it comes through the outer crust of the Earth and it spews into our atmosphere and it's cooled, it sometimes organizes itself and breaks into predictable planes, creating columns. You can pop that slide up and you can see what I'm talking about. Just like magic. Ready? Poof. There it is. Columnar basalt. So I can see how someone might assume these massive rocks must have been literally hewn by human hands, and whoever would have done that must have been enormous. I can see that. If you don't have access to an introductory understanding of geological science, what else would you assume? You tell me, look at that. What would you assume? The Tabaru people didn't know much about tectonic plate theory, as it turns out. Their understanding of the Earth's crust wasn't as deep as their breadth knowledge and understanding of ocean tides and cardinal directions and moon phases and how to cultivate the most desirable substance on Earth during the Middle Ages, the spice that launched endless global wars of which they were always the victims. The Tabaru weren't terribly concerned with the scene floor, as it turns out, so they looked at these massive pillars and they did what any one of us would do. They created a story around it. The Tabaru are, just like us, meaning makers. They assumed that these huge columns must have sustained an enormous house and that only the likes of Togo. Now, I want to be clear, this is not the picture of what we went to find in the forest, so you can drop that. People are way too distracted now. Kill the screens immediately. Lock the back doors. Okay, I got you again. They assumed that these stone columns must have sustained an enormous house and that only someone as large as their founding chief could have lived in such a house. And it makes perfect sense to me when you think about it from a social science perspective. That story had a function well beyond any kind of fact that we as outsiders might feel essential to tell them about how these ended up there. You see, when your tribe is enslaved, literally, by every single iteration of colonial power, be they Dutch or Portuguese or Spanish or English or French, if you are enslaved by every single iteration of colonial power that had sufficient sailing sciences and maritime mastery to navigate the high seas, then you need a bold story of origin, don't you? One that speaks to your dignity and to your destiny. You need to be able to tell your children the stories about the noble birth of your people in a world that sees them only as weak and exploitable. It's a matter of survival, these stories we tell ourselves. The Jabaru people had so very little to boast about to their young. How dare any outsider like me come in and deflate their stories of origin, their stories of their founding warrior? How dare we come in with stupid facts and not so very helpful ideas about columnar basalt and ridiculous tectonic theory, which, if we're honest, to be clear, is still made of a fair amount of conjecture. You know, I said nothing when asked what my impression was of these massive columns, nothing other than, oh man, what a god among men Togo must have been. But you know what? Now that the Jabaru have a written language that Ed gave them because he taught them to use solar-powered QWERTY keyboards, now that they have smartphones in their hands, their grandkids will need to look back at their own history. However functional it has been till now for previous generations, they might need an upgrade because, you see, all cosmologies need to be reconsidered in time. And I wonder if you see my point as we launch into a series of conversations about the stories that shaped us. You see, stories have functional purposes that go well beyond the facts alone. Wait, what? No one admitted this to you about the epic stories that form our Christian faith? No one told you this about our stories? Were you taught to take them at face value simply as they were told to you, questioning nothing, accepting everything as written, no matter how ancient, no matter how odd? Is that what you were told? Of course you were. That's what we were all told, because Christians needed those stories almost as much as the ancient Jews who wrote them down. They served a very important purpose in the shaping of our collective psyche, you see, like massive stone colonnades and giant footprints in stone. They worked for us until they didn't. Friends, we're adults now, and adults are allowed to ask some of the hard questions about these stories. We're allowed to say some of these just aren't believable. Now, I'm not saying to throw them out. I'm saying hold on to them tightly if that works for you. It worked for me for decades. But blind acceptance, or adolescence, if you will, has a natural shelf life. It's supposed to. So, does that mean we throw them away? Not at all. We have another option. We have a grown-up option, as it turns out, which is to hold them for what they were, respect the weight that they carry and still carry, but allow them to rest gently now in our collective minds because we've grown up significantly since the first hearing of these stories. We now know where the sun goes at night. It isn't a fiery chariot pulled across the sky as it once seemed to very smart and wholehearted people. You see, I want to be a man of the 21st century, a man of science and curiosity and reason and intellectual rigor. I want to be a modern member of the human experience, one that doesn't hide in my own shirt pocket when learned people of the hard sciences take the mic. I want to be honest and true and authentic. I want to be an adult. But I also want to be a man of faith, one who's deeply rooted in these histories, these ancient stories that have given our people purpose and meaning for millennia. So I propose that we look at them again with open hearts and open minds. With zero animus or anger, with no more axes to grind or old injuries to avenge, I propose we let the timeless beauty of these stories, buried in the telling of them, do what beauty does so well, inspire us and captivate our imagination. Since you know well, imagination is way more responsive to beauty than it ever was to fact. Anyhow, beauty is her own truth category. Friends, your body has always known that bit of wisdom. It always has. It's actually a form of violence to force upon a beautiful ancient story the weight of our late modern expectation of facticity and historicity. And I would argue it just makes those stories uglier when we do. So let's look again. I propose, what were you told about the Garden of Eden? What were you told about where we came from? How did we get here? When your wide-eyed child asks, what do you tell them? Because they will, and you'll need to have an answer. And no matter how you respond, I wonder if you can see how important your next few sentences after that well-shaped question, I wonder if you can see how important it is in the formation of their little heads and hearts. And this is exactly the historical context into which the story of the Garden of Eden gets inserted. Let me see if I can make this case. Having spent many generations as slaves in Egypt under the leadership of Moses, finally the Hebrew people marched out into the desert and suddenly discovered their desperate need for a story of origin. They had left the one of Egypt behind. And so Genesis becomes that story that they shape themselves around. It isn't an eyewitness account. This won't be revelation to you. Moses could not have written about something he was not present at. Moses also could not have written about his death. We've just told ourselves Moses wrote the whole thing because he was there. No, he wasn't there, friends. This is not an eyewitness account. He wasn't pretending to have been there. This is a story of mythological size and scope. And you must know that I use that word myth with all the respect of a social scientist. You see, myth is a functional thing. It's not about being true or not. It's a functional thing of the very highest order in culture. And to properly assess the value of a story of origin like Genesis, just remind yourself that it has been functioning as a guiding myth now for 34 centuries and counting. That's a powerful commentary on the beauty it contains. So let's read very briefly in summary form what they came up with. And I encourage you to look for beauty and meaning, not for precise facts or eyewitness details. So Genesis 1 tells the story this way. This will be familiar. I'll read the first couple verses. They'll be on your screen. Then you're going to have to allow me to skip through these different 7 days, or we'll be here until next Father's Day. Genesis 1. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was complete chaos, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. I always wondered, I used to ask Dad, why are there waters if he hadn't created waters yet? Shut up and just swallow, was what I was told. Verse 3, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. Verse 6, and God said, let there be a dome in the midst of the waters. I prefer the King James word, the firmament. It just seems to mean fewer things, and it's easier for me to lock in. Anyway, let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the other waters. Verse 9, and then God said, let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And we're starting to see these 7 days as we know them. Then God said, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seeds, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. Verse 14, then God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And then God made, in verse 16, 2 great lights, the great light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. And of course, that's the sun and the moon, and then the stars. Verse 20, and then God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky. And so God created the great sea monsters, which have always intrigued me, and every living creature that moves, and of everything, of that which the waters swarm, and every winged bird and every kind. And God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And verse 24, and then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things. And I'm so glad, since I have daughters, that he brought creeping things, because I will forever be useful in removing the creeping things. And wild animals in the earth of every kind. And then verse 26, then God said, let us make humans in our image, plural there in the Hebrew, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish in the sea, and over the birds in the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals in the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humans in his image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. Verse 28. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish. And you're beginning to see the repetition. And this should harken back to Hebrew poetry. It's written in grand poetic repetition, grand poetic style. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, and the 6th day. And that's the story we have in Genesis chapter 1. Now notice, after each day, God made a declaration of goodness. We call this original goodness. It was God's idea. Except on that final day. On that day, God declared that it was very good. And this is the picture of a proud designer, of an artist, deeply content with the work of their hands, which might be the most important image to take away from this story of origin in the end. But as you know, this wasn't the only story of origin. There were others that contended for Hebrew imagination in the desert at the time, the most important of them being, of course, the one that's preserved for us in Genesis 2. And I wonder if anyone has ever told you that these are completely different stories. completely different versions of the events. You see, in Genesis 1 is written in grand poetic form, features a mysterious and brooding God, otherworldly and disembodied, who hovers over elements and creates effortlessly, while Genesis 2 is written in folksy prose, features a sculptor God who becomes a surgeon God who works in the dirt to make a friend. This God tires and needs a day of rest at the end of his labors. In Genesis 1, God makes a plurality of people all at once. Look at your Hebrew pronouns. Go all the way back to school for that if you don't believe me. And then in Genesis 2, God made one man first, and then the woman is taken from his rib as a solution to man's chronic loneliness. Both versions appear in our collection, but they've got totally different aims, and they come from totally different periods in ancient history. They don't even coincide in the terms that they use to refer to God. One speaks of God as Elohim, and one speaks of God as Yahweh. These are hundreds of years apart in their origin. So why is it that we insist that they're both telling the same story when they don't agree on the details? Now hang with me, friend. We insist that simply because a man named Augustine said so. We're still sorting through the shenanigans of the 3rd and 4th centuries. That's when Christianity was mixed with power and global ambition, and something was lost permanently. Something was lost in the soul of our faith. Christianity was legalized in the year 313 of the Common Era, and as soon as Constantine, the emperor, figured out how to manipulate it, he realized that Christianity could be used to control the masses. Our faith lost her soul and became the engine of empire. Augustine was one of the original theologians who took it upon himself to straighten out Christian dogma in the early years. He hailed from Algeria, North Africa. His life happens right between the first two great church councils of Nicaea and Constantinople. That's where the canon was closed and then deified, and that's where the divinity of Jesus was established and the doctrine of the Trinity was formed. That was the milieu of his upbringing. And the interesting thing is that by the time the Christian movement was almost completely Gentile, that's when Augustine comes along and begins to codify these doctrines. You see, there were no Jews left in the halls of influence of young Christianity to help interpret these ancient stories of origin that belonged to them, ancient stories like Genesis. At least there weren't many. And the pre-modern Gentile sensibilities of Augustine were skewed heavily towards literalism and facticity. So Genesis lost her soul, one of beauty and allegory and poetry. And she became something more like an eyewitness account of 7 literal days of creation, which is not how Jews would ever have read that story. Now, we could spend all summer on this point alone, but we won't, we mustn't. Here's the question for us. Are we expected to believe that God made one set of human beings, who, by the way, were Swedish, at least in the flannel graphs in the church basements where I hung out? Are we expected to believe that God made one set of human beings and then threw them out of paradise because they were curious about enlightening themselves about understanding both good and evil? You see, Jewish scholars, for the most part, read the Genesis account as the emergence of human consciousness, not a story of worlds lost because of sin and temptation. You see, the church fathers of the 3rd and 4th centuries thought everything was perfect in the beginning. But we know that's not how the world works. We know the world is still becoming. The world is still evolving, adapting, and taking shape and unfolding in beauty and complexity. I mean, don't grown-ups know this? Charles Darwin, was able to see that things begin simple and they move in the direction of greater complexity over time. It's not the other way around, and Darwin wasn't the first to say it. He was just the most articulate at the time. You see, it's the trajectory of a literal 7-day creation based on a literal reading of Genesis that feels musty and obsolete to me now. Can I be that honest? What we know about the 4th century is that the work of Jesus, still bearing the irksome cargo of sacrificial systems and atonement and blood offerings, it was falling out of favor as cultures became more sophisticated and global in nature and scope. And by the 4th century, people from all over the globe began to interact in public marketplaces and arenas of ideas around countless stories of origins and cosmovisions. And many of them were beautiful stories, and some of them were far more compelling even than an angry God who had to murder his son to remind himself how to love what he himself declared good, according to their own poetry. You see, Augustine had to make Eden about guilt and sin and punishment. Everything was about original sin to him. But that's an idea that was foreign to the text completely. You see, original sin doesn't live naturally within Jewish writings until Augustine, a Gentile, said so. And it didn't become official church doctrine until the 16th century at the Council of Trent, by the way. But remember, consolidating power and influence was the aim of the 4th century church fathers under Emperor Constantine. Original sin, supported by literal interpretation of Genesis, is essential if the world's people are to be convinced of their need of a savior. You have to create a market before you can deliver a product if you intend to control outcomes. Everyone knows that. And as you might expect, this is the moment that these accounts, these ancient, beautiful stories of origin, were no longer seen as beautiful poems or stories about God's interactions with the cosmos. This is the moment that they became the very words of God, words with which, I might add, one cannot tinker. I love that sentence. Way too many commas for my mom's taste. You can't tinker without risking your life with these words after Augustine is done with them. No grown-up questions are allowed. Augustine gives us a world of airtight Christian doctrines, a world of infidels and saints with nothing in between. But please, friend, please, is this what grown-ups do with ancient texts? So what are we to make of this epic story of origin? Can anybody hear me whispering conclusion to the piano player? Telepathically? What are we to make of this epic story of origin? Can we appreciate its beauty, its limitations? Can we see how it speaks something essential to the people of its time, even to us, all these years later? Can we? I hope we can. You see, great stories of origin always speak to the why and to the who much more profoundly than to the when and to the how, and that's how we've done violence to these stories. We don't have to let go of what we know to be true about the fossil record or what we can extrapolate mathematically from a collision of matter that initiated a very slow development of single-cell organisms that eventually learned to reproduce and complexify and achieve increasing consciousness in honor of their origin. We get to admit that the invention of fire and its impact on our diet and our caloric intake literally allows us to repurpose huge muscle groups in our head and face, which created capacity for more thought and more language and eventually higher and higher levels of cognition in honor of our origin. We don't have to allow ancient poetry processed through pre-modern minds of empire builders to stifle our divine invitation to build new models of understanding of the nature of God and of the nature of the cosmos. Friend, I can't say it any clearer than this. We are not trying to re-achieve paradise lost, friends. We are still becoming. We're still on our way. Eden, whatever it was or wasn't, is behind us. Total integration is what lies ahead now. Those who came before us were innovating, and so should we be. No model of God is binding forever. There are always more being developed. That's the point. And I hope you can hear some permission in this that might set you free if you let it. If this is too much for you, it's just too far for you to go, that's fine. Put it on a shelf for now. Take your time. But asking these questions, friends, asking these hard questions, this is what grown-ups do. And we both know being a grown-up isn't merely a matter of age, it's a matter of release, of letting go. It's a matter of acceptance. You see, chronology works on all of us eventually. It works on us unpredictably, but it works on us reliably. Some of us remain children till our dying breath, but I want so much more for you and I than that. Just know that growing up will never be about gripping tighter to ancient stories or hating people who don't see them the way that we do. It will never be about being more right about our dogmatic interpretations of ancient texts. No. Growing up will always be about being more free and full of wonder, and inspired increasingly by beauty, inspired to keep asking, keep wondering, keep building new models of reality. Oh, let's be that kind of people, friend. Wouldn't that be fun? I gotta take this back here. Mark and the band are gonna sing a song now, and we're gonna get our hearts ready for communion.
Galaxies are formed.
of your breath the planets form. If the stars were made to worship, so will I can see your heart in everything you made. Every burning star a signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I. God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty your voice. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. And as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch their breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. If it all reveals your nature, so will I can see your heart in everything you say. Every painted sky a canvas of your grace. If creation still obeys you, so will
So, I wonder, how does that land on you? We just tugged on something really important. I'm just curious. Chris is like, I want to hear from a couple of you. It's the worst thing to do for an online audience. That's okay. I will repeat for the online out-of-towners anything that's said. Somebody give me some feedback, some resonance, some dissonance. We can handle it. Have you always known this to be true? The 9:30 was super talkative, very chatty. The jokes were better at 9:30. For real, let me hear from you. Do you feel some permission in this? Do you feel some freedom in this? Were you taught to never question these things, and if you did, you'd be electrocuted? I see heads bobbing. God would be, this God of love, by the way, would be super angry if you ask hard questions about these things. Were you taught that? Yeah. Where's the guardrails? It's a great question. Yeah. Okay, so the question for those who are not hearing the room is, what are the guardrails? That's a really good question. It's a question we were taught to ask. See, we were taught to be afraid of something might jump out of line, so we don't even start asking questions. And yet, you guys, we're going to talk about things like, seriously, every animal on earth in a boat? Are we serious about this? So here's the thing. We live in this gap between academy and pew, and here's what I want to tell you. I've been reading deeply in the last couple of weeks about how, as clergy people, we have been taught to resist bringing this kind of honesty to the pews lest we upset the faithful. And so what you learned in grad school and I learned in grad school, we keep separate from what we hear about on Sunday mornings, because we were taught don't tinker with the stories of origin and the keys, because we were taught exactly that. 1 inch outside the line and we lose everything. But I wonder, have you lost everything, or are you getting closer to asking the right sort of questions that lead you to something like original goodness? I think that might be the point of this story. Is that God made it and interacted with it, right? Chris says, I never read it that way. Chris, did you grow up in the evangelical church? Of course you didn't, Chris. These are scars the rest of us bring. Someone else, anyone else? It's kind of courageous to speak up. Right.
learning about this and thinking how it all, like around the age we learned how people are made,
Yeah.
where did they all come from? To the heavenly gift.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, what's your first? Right. What's your first name? Grant. So for those of you who are listening in at a distance, Grant says he remembers viscerally being young and being told that how can all people come from these two people who only had 3 sons according to this account, and then where did their wives come from? And boy, the answer I got for that was super hysterical. Something like, well, angel women? I'm like, so cheerleaders? I was 8. I'm like, no, that's not it. I don't know. Just quit asking questions, kid. Literally, you guys, here's what I want you to begin to deposit at the front door as we take this summer's journey. We were taught to be anti-intellectual in the way we held our faith. And you know that it's like the emergency brake on an elevator. When it senses that the sensors have dropped and the thing's free falling, it just brakes it. It just comes to a halt wherever that is. We were taught that in our faith. Don't ask these questions because none of these grown-ups have answers for this. And yet I wonder, is that what they taught you in science and university? And I'm not telling you everything they taught you was okay. I'm saying let's be curious people. Let's hold these things for what they are. We read them devoid of a Jewish perspective, and we have forgotten what poetry and mythological beauty, we've forgotten it because we've reduced it all to facticity and repeatability and historicity, and you guys, it doesn't work for our kids. Our kids aren't having it. So let's ask some better questions. Anyone else? Maybe we're sideways. Maybe we've jumped the rails. But I'd rather pursue hard questions than lock down a bunch of things and say we can't ask this and we can't ask that and we can't use this and we can't touch that. Anyone else wants to be courageous? Yes. Yeah. Right. So it feels comforting to us, but there's an awareness that not for all of our friends will this be equally comforting. Guys, I didn't get off a motorcycle and tell people that's columnar basalt. You got to get the sequence right here. Here's where we as Western Europeans, descendants of very confident people when speaking about the things of God, here's where we get it wrong. We show up and say, it's all wrong. And the reality is people cleave to these things that help them define themselves. We have to be very gentle about letting those younger Tabaru find online what columnar basalt is. That can never be my role. I wonder if that story might actually help us think through the sequence of things. Does that make sense? We must be very careful. You don't show up and tell someone that everything they ever believed is somehow based in something that's not real. We've done that for about 6 centuries in the world, guys, and it has produced 0 good things. Maybe we'll talk about that next summer, yeah. I'm finally feeling the courage. Guys, I've just been ignoring the stories forever. I just roll my eyes when people talk about fish swallowing dudes. It wasn't a story about a fish. It was a story about someone who could not possibly believe that God could move in these people. We've missed the story and we focused on the fish. And we've got scientists who go around the world and try to still find the remains of a boat that could carry every living organism on earth in it. And you guys, it isn't findable because it wasn't the point of it. So we'll talk about that next week. All right, so hang on. It's going to be a fun summer. If you're having trouble with it, it's okay. Take what you can take. Keep whatever distance you need. But I'm just curious if some of the naming of these things don't resonate with things you've always thought you just were taught you couldn't say out loud. And if we go there, then we're going somewhere worth going. So why don't you join me on your feet as we prepare our hearts for communion. We'll get this wrapped up pretty close to on time. Almost. What could be more universal and organic and indigenous and easy to understand than Jesus' final message to his friends the night before he gave his life for them? But let's prepare our hearts for communion now. And I would just pray these words, Almighty God, to whom all hearts are open and all desires are known, where could we hide from your love? We've never yet found a place. So cleanse us now by your Spirit, we pray, that we may perfectly love you as you perfectly love us. Through Christ our Lord, amen. Christ our Lord, that is our friend and our mentor and our neighbor and our father and our mother, invites each of you to this table that has a place with your name on it waiting for you. And as you honestly seek to live and walk in love and peace with one another, therefore, let us turn our hearts to God now. And so this is the moment when we observe confession. And I want you to hear this. It's less confession from sin then it is confession from hiding and shame, from a God who infuses all those places where we hide. So pray these words with me, if you will. Merciful God, we believe that you accept our heartfelt confession today. Knowing you to be gentle and kind, even when we are not, we confess. We have been distracted, at times lacking in love. We have failed to love our neighbors as ourselves because we have failed to love ourselves as you do. Forgive us, we pray, and free us to be a people of peace through Jesus Christ, our Lord. And on that night when he gathered his friends, the night before his blood was shed, he lifted the bread to heaven, and he said, "This is my broken body, which is for you and for all." And then he lifted the cup to heaven as if driving that confusion even deeper. And he said, there's a new covenant now afoot. There's a new product coming to market. There's a whole new understanding of how all this works. And it will be sealed with this wine, which is actually my blood, because it's all the same. And it will be for all people, and there will be no need to limit it. There will be no need to limit its access. And I can't even imagine how the confusion must have just ran rampant in their minds. Before they had even seen his blood spilled, he says, "This is my blood." So at the base of the glass around the building, you know how it works. There's the elements. Just during the next song or two songs before the benediction, approach and grab that element. Take it back to your seat and partake when you're ready. And let's pray these words as we've been instructed. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen.
Make
just catch their breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. If it all reveals your nature, so will I. If it all reveals your nature, so will I. If it all reveals your nature, so will I.
Today's benediction is written by David Nix, and he writes, Church, we are wired for story, but plumbed for science. Our heads in the clouds and our toes in the dirt. We inhabit the ambiguous intersection of faith and fact, myth and meaning, tradition and truth. We are inescapably the sum of all these things, a paradox of roots and reason, driven by impulse, to run from the past towards unreachable perfection. But as we travel that long road between the before and the becoming, perhaps we are just taking the long way home. Go in the peace of knowing where you've been and where you're bound.